All right. Hey, welcome to the podcast. Super excited. We have Kathleen Boyle Dalen joining us today. Let me spend a second here and tell you about our amazing guest from Kansas City. Dr. Kathleen Boyle Dalen is the founder and principal of KBD Consulting. I think Kathleen is known as KBD in her network, so love the name. Certainly makes a lot of sense. Kathleen is a PhD in psychology, and she's got a deep experience set in things like strategy and learning and organizational design, behavior and culture, as well as things like partnership development. 20 years experience as a C-suite leader, including very recently as Chief Talent Integration and Culture Officer at the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City. Kathleen has her own practice today and works a lot with C-suite leaders and joins us today to talk a little bit about performance in the context of organizations, but also really from a psychology perspective. And so, Kathleen, really super glad that you were able to be with us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to get to talk with you, Paul. I'm excited about this. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Well, I do have to start, like, our Kansas City, do we need to talk about the Chiefs? Should we? I mean, should you be, I know you're flying that flag, right?
I mean, I'll say this, like, I'm super excited, like thrilled, happy, all that stuff. Sports, like, I mean, not so much my thing. So I'm thrilled. If Jason were on, he would have a lot to say about how excited he is. I'm happy. I may or may not have watched the Super Bowl myself, but I'm very happy that they won.
That's great. No, I love that. And I'm kind of busting chops here a little bit for Kathleen, because we've talked about this before, and sports is not your thing. In fact, I want to take a second and I want to read what Kathleen wrote. Kathleen was kind enough, by the way, to spend some time and write an endorsement for this today's podcast, sponsored by The Most Important Game. Play better, struggle less, enjoy more. And I want to read what Kathleen wrote, because this is just the best, right? So Kathleen's writes, I don't golf, and yet I cannot put this book down. Not because I intend to golf. I don't. I love how you just made it very clear to all of us. You're like, hey, I'm never playing golf, just so you know.
Yeah, just to be clear, like, it's not that I like am reading it because I intend to. I won't.
Exactly. Kathleen goes on to say, but because the insights are immediately transferable to my work, want to learn to loosen your grip and tap into the curiosity and your sense of play to grow, this book transcends golf. Full stop. Read this book. So anyway, thank you for that, Kathleen. That's really fantastic. But I think it's definitely reflective of how you feel about sports, which is totally cool.
Yeah. I love the book. I'm sure you remember this, but I'm going to ask you. I mean, when we were in Wind River, however long ago that was, you talked
in 2019, right? So 2019, Kathleen and I and a pretty good sized group of colleagues and friends in our network spent a week hiking in the Wind River Mountains, right?
Do you remember talking about the book then? Like, do you remember discussing? I remember you saying, I'm going to write a book. Do you remember that?
I remember that we had a lot of conversations. I don't remember specifically, and I'm guessing that the book had a different look and feel at that point, because I think I made an important shift maybe a year or so later.
Okay. Yeah. I just think it's cool, like that, to think back to. I can vividly remember you saying, I'm going to write this book.
Yeah. And I think I had ideas around a project that was really like, so I was sort of like trying to invent the concepts, and it was going to be more of a conceptual book. Whereas what this ended up being was really a collection of essays, right?
Yeah.
That's really what this is. And I had been writing about the golf space for a while. And, the book that is today is a little bit of a different project, but, it's funny how these things change over time, right?
Yeah. Well, I love it. And congratulations on it. It's really, I find it very practical.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathleen. I will say, this is a book that is lightly illustrated.
Yes, it
And I
is.
think there's an illustration that is, if I remember the page here, I
There
think
is.
it's,
I know where it is.
oh, you know what, is it
Find it.
137?
Hold on,
I
I
don't know
can.
why I say 137.
It's
So
107.
107. Okay.
Mhm.
So part of the story of Kathleen and me and others in our group being in the Wind River Mountains is that llamas were our pack animals. Come on, here we go. So we had these pack animals with us, and they were carrying in all our food and our, I guess, our tents, right?
Yeah, all our stuff. I mean,
All our
not all
stuff.
our stuff,
Yeah,
but the big
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. And so we had, I think we had 7 llamas for the group, something like that.
Yeah.
And we didn't really, none of us really understood this, but it turns out llamas are very social, and like they have all these personalities. And so I ended up writing about the experience in 2019. And one of the illustrations in the book that came from my illustrator, which is just the best. I'm going to see if this comes up here.
Yeah. I loved it when I saw it. I feel like you did, or your illustrator did Oregon very proud. I think like and all the
Yes.
llamas that were with us, they look good in that picture.
Oregon and Roper and I can't remember the other names, but
I can't either.
yeah,
I can't either. Yeah.
that's good stuff. So yeah, this is fun to be here. I this topic this is called the Most Important Game podcast. And what we really focus on here is we focus on the inside game dynamics. My premise in all of this is that, we spend a lot of time on our outside game skills and, living a life that is like an outside game life, because there's a lot of things out there, and we should do that. There's no question about it. But the value in spending time on this other game, what I call the inside game, the game played here, is that it optimizes our outside game, right? It's the
Totally
thing that
agree.
prepares us for that. And so I'd love to get your perspective on all of this. Any quick thoughts as you kind of come to the call, and in terms
Yeah.
of, the outside game, what I call the most important game? Curious to.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like what I would say, which like rings true certainly with your book, but even as you say this, and I think in all of my work and the way I think about my work and life, I think that inside game, like that, getting developing an understanding first and an awareness of like what is going on inside, like getting in touch with, all right, like what is that? And if I'm getting like yanked around by my emotions, can I notice that? Like some of the very basic stuff that I think it's fascinating how important that very basic stuff is. That like we name these concepts, and sometimes for me when I say them out loud, like I'm a little bit embarrassed, at God, like that sounds like, like just so totally basic. And I actually think it's that stuff, like the simple stuff, that if we can pay attention to it and kind of hold ourselves accountable to staying curious about it, like that's where your big gains then come from out in whatever game it is you're playing, yeah. So I think
Yeah, I
it's
love that.
hugely important. And, I think for me, like one of my lessons has been to be okay with talking about it. Like I think for a while I was in situations where I was thinking about it a lot, like very aware of it. And yet, I don't know, nervous to name it, like nervous to name it, nervous to talk about it because it did feel somehow, I don't know, small or embarrassing, like, oh my God, you're thinking about that stuff. I'm thinking about the big stuff. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Right. No, that's a great point. So you're thinking about like the struggle for that you're experiencing, that you're going through, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. Why? I love this concept, especially as an organizational concept. Like, I'm working with some clients right now where nobody feels like they can admit or show anything other than perfection and you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's just unbelievable. And this culture gets, it's very, very difficult for the people who are in it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that's one of the greatest constraints on performance, or I guess I'll say I think two of the greatest constraints on performance, individual and team, are fear and ego. Yeah, I mean, I think that like those two things, and that's what comes to mind when I hear what you're saying. It's the degree to which, we're kind of captured by our own egos around how do I look? How am I showing up? Do you like me? Am I viewed as perfect enough, smart enough, expert enough? And so like that to me is like the ego part. And then the fear of, what if I say this thing and I'm not liked? What if I don't really know the answer? What if I just screwed something up and now I have to admit to everyone that I just screwed this up? Yeah, like I think of those two big constraints, fear and ego.
That is huge. It seems like we're so good at painting a picture in the future, and it might be the near future, it might be tomorrow, the next day, next year. It seems like we're really good at painting these awful paintings, these awful images of what could happen, and we're not always great at painting what's possible.
Yep. Agreed. And I think like I don't know, I'm curious about what you think about this. I tend to think that like the path out of the scary story in your own head, right? Like the narrative you're telling yourself, and then into the what's possible is curiosity. And I think of curiosity as a muscle. I mean, like as a set of practices, a muscle, whatever language works for you there. But I have found that what is helpful is being able to notice and name, whatever your pattern is, whether it's like when that story, that tape starts to play in your mind of like whatever the scary story is, can you notice it and name it and then start to get curious? Even just get curious around like, okay, like what's going on for me right now? Like what is coming up for me? Like what am I reacting to or captured by? And then, all right, like what can I learn from this moment? Like just slowly starting to follow that thread of what can I learn? Like you said, what might be possible here? And I think that does kind of unhook us from the place that narrative likely takes us, which is how do I start to control everything? Like how do I start to control and instead to get pretty open?
I love that. That word curiosity, that's so powerful. I first came to that word like as a deep psychological concept, and frankly, as an organizational behavior concept, early in my coaching career when I was working with a client that they were working inside of, they had done some work with Larry Sen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I didn't know this, right? Larry Sen, he's really the father of the modern corporate culture movement, right?
Yeah.
And his mood elevator.
Yes, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
What a brilliant concept. So yeah, I love that you brought that up because I had never really considered that before.
Yeah. One place, maybe, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like, what's the first place that I encountered curiosity as this concept connected to performance. And one place that I started to pay attention to it is John Gottman. Are you familiar with his work? So John Gottman is a psychologist who he and his wife have built a tremendous kind of practice and base of research really around studying couples. So he has a ton of work around studying couples. I think he's been quoted in saying like he doesn't take his work outside of that space, and yet I do. So like I'm just going to name that.
That's all right.
But he studied couples and those relationships and trust in those relationships. And so one thing that he talks about in like the science of trust, and for him, the science of trust is focused on couples, is, that like one tool that we all need to have and one practice we all need to kind of lean into is curiosity as an antidote to defensiveness. And so you can think about like the way that plays out, right, in fights between couples, where all of a sudden you get really locked into, oh my gosh, like you're criticizing something that is fundamental to how I see myself. I feel attacked. I feel worried about how I'm being perceived. And so I start to get defensive. And so, like, the move, of course, is instead, can I get curious? Can I try to understand where might you be coming from? Like, what's your perspective? Can I get curious and try to learn more? And I think that that's me. I think that is one of, for me, like the fundamental first experiences that I had really thinking about, oh, like curiosity is a practice and a tool and a strategy that helps individuals and teams perform better.
Oh yeah, that is great. I love the word antidote, because antidote to me, it's like almost like it's like medicine. It's like,
Yeah.
right? It's the one thing you need in that moment.
Yes,
It's the
totally. I
thing
mean,
that can shift.
I'm going to guess that you have plenty of these examples. I know I for sure do, of times when like you can even think about yourself, in whatever you're doing, where you noticed that moment in yourself of getting kind of like starting to shut down or close in, and like closing off conversation and possibility as like a protective move. And to me, curiosity does feel like an antidote in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I'm sort of thinking like curiosity is a bit of a portal through which, if we are willing to, move through it,
Yes.
it can lead to much more productive things, and out of the, sort of being sucked into that black hole of despair and
Yeah.
frustration and anger and, as you say, defensiveness. And yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I know Sen talks about like this mood elevator where like the curiosity is really the key to moving upward
Yep.
from negative emotions.
Yes. Yeah. Totally. I love it.
Yeah, I love that this came up too, because it's, one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on was because it might look like I spend a lot of time, talking about golf because I wrote, you know what I mean? And I do, and I enjoy it. Right. But to me, the same dynamics that help somebody to move successfully through the challenges on the golf course are at play inside of an organization, inside of a team. It's literally all the same, right?
Yeah. Agreed. I mean, that's, I'm so even like when I think about your book, there's this one, you're gonna have to help me with it, but like there's this one chapter, one story in there. It's a bus driver for like a rental car agency.
Right.
Um, and
Marty.
it's, oh my God, it's so like it's like the story of like you're getting on that like rental car shuttle bus, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and basically my recollection of it is that the driver of that rental car shuttle bus kind of introduces himself, like says the stuff that maybe you would expect someone at first to say, but then he goes on, right? And you're sitting there like kind of thinking like where is this going? And
Yep.
he ends up imparting this lesson around make the small changes, like make small tweaks in your day-to-day life that kind of shift your course, right? And put you on a better path, maybe improve your performance incrementally. And like that those small shifts, they add up, right? Like they add up to big changes. And so I don't know, I think that story stood out to me because one, like even though I don't golf and I won't golf, nor do I really play another sport.
We're making that statement very clear. Kathleen is not taking up golf, just in case anybody wanted to know.
Not happening. But and so I
Does
can
Jason
picture
golf, by the way? Does Jason golf at all? Or
I mean, I'm just gonna say this. He's a terrible golfer.
you know,
And I think
people are going to hear this.
I know it's okay. I think he would say that too. And
That's all
so
right.
he doesn't really golf.
Yeah.
But like I can read that story and think to myself, I can picture how that helps someone like a golfer, right? Like it's like I can kind of get it. But then for me, when I'm reading it, all I'm thinking is, oh, exactly. Like that is exactly what we need when we're trying to improve our own performance or when we're trying to improve the performance of a team. And I think of that, like, to me, that is akin to the idea of like help people dress for the weather. Like I think when you're a coach or you're coaching a team, part of your job is to help people anticipate that growth is like an up and down bumpy road, right? Like it can get messy. And so I think of that as like you got to help people dress for the weather. You got to help them anticipate that, like, yeah, it could get cold and uncomfortable and it's going to rain. And like, so you got to make sure like you got all your gear. And these are not always going to be like sunny day after sunny day. In fact,
Yeah.
like sunny day could be followed by a pretty brutal storm. And I think that, like, to me, that's where that chapter in the book, like the small changes matter, is to help people keep their sights on. Like, yes, you're dressed for the weather. Yeah, you just had like a sunny day and now like we're in the middle of a storm, and keep after it with making like your small changes. Those add up. Like, I don't, do those
No
concepts fit
doubt.
together for you at
No
all?
question. I love that story, Kathleen, about Marty, the bus driver. And it was one of those things where, it, as I tell in the book, it was a little bit surprising. I just wasn't expecting it. And sometimes these little messages, if we're willing to be curious enough
Yeah.
and think about life and our experiences as we move through it,
Yeah.
maybe you'll be a little bit curious about the teammates that we're working with.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, wow, Paul really got upset about that. I wonder what that was. I wonder, he's not normally like that. I wonder what made him fly off the head. Maybe you can be a good teammate by checking in with saying, hey, is everything okay? Right? It's this kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. It's
Um,
maybe it's not about me, right? Like maybe something else is going on with Paul. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I love that. Um, how did you go down the psychology path? What was that like for you?
Like, so I was one of those kids that I I mean, I can remember like the career day, which I don't know, maybe it was like middle school or high school, where, like where there was a psychologist. And I mean, I was all in. Like at that point, I was like, I'm all in. Like that's definitely what I want to do. I went to undergrad majoring in psychology. I mean, I knew
Oh,
I just had this, I was intensely curious about why people do what they do.
mm,
And I was curious about that, in part, like my family was chaotic growing up. And so I think like as a kid, there was like that like need, like it was beneficial, to be like curious about human behavior because it felt kind of like a need to know. But that curiosity and it just stayed with me. And so like I knew I wanted to do it, majored in psychology in undergrad, like went straight through to graduate school. And I think like the shift for me, maybe the only big shift in like that whole pursuing psychology is early on, I thought I wanted to work with individuals, right? Like I thought I wanted to do clinical work. And at some point in grad school, thankfully early on, I was sitting down with a faculty member and I said, and we were in the middle of clinical internships or practicum. And I said, like, this is not my thing. Like I'm not loving the individual work. And he introduced me to organizational work and introduced me to an amazing mentor. I got to work with an amazing woman and never really looked back. I mean? I think for me then it
wow.
was like I was hooked on the idea of creating conditions where individuals and teams could like be at their best at work. And I think partly because I had some great early mentors and great bosses. Like so
Yeah.
I had those experiences where you're able to like stretch and grow and take risks and like do your best work. And I think once you've had that opportunity, at least for me, once I had that opportunity, I thought like everyone needs to have this.
Oh, that's awesome. So it was really something that it came early for you.
Yeah.
it stuck with you, and then you got this amazing opportunity inside of organizations.
Yeah. And I've always, like that, I think like the curiosity that I feel about it just continues to grow. I mean, it feels like it's one of
Yeah.
those, I don't know, it's one of those spaces where, yes, of course, I feel like I know a fair amount and I have a fair amount of experience and expertise. And I feel like the amount that I don't know, like the amount that there is still to learn
Yeah.
is vast. And I love that.
What, so you're getting your PhD in psychology, and like, as I understand psychology, I mean, there's a couple of psychology is sort of like coaching. There's a number of different fundamental models, right?
Yep.
There's Carl Jung, there's Freud,
Yeah.
so as you move through through graduate school, like, do you or did you sort of land on a model that became the model for you, and then you continue to use that, or how does that work?
Yeah. I'll say, I think one kind of school of thought that really resonated with me was cognitive behavioral. But I think that is because, and that's certainly like not the only thing that I draw on, not by a long shot. But I think the thread, like for me from cognitive behavioral to where I am now is I view cognitive behavioral as like the very practical part of psychology. Like I view it
Right.
as, and this is like what I'm about to say is a total overgeneralization. But yeah, like I view like Freudian and like other models of psychology as kind of like navel gazing. Like let's dig into your past, and we might get stuck in that for decades.
Yes.
And like
Right.
fine, that's interesting, like and I do find some of that stuff interesting. And yet, like what I'm really always hungry for is make it practical. Like make it practical, help someone, give someone something, give me something that I can experiment with, like play with, start to see differences with right away. Like I'm
Yeah.
hungry for that. And I've felt that way, like the longer that I've been in my career, the more I continue to feel as though we do people a disservice when we give them like a concept or an academic idea, but we don't say, and so like, here's what it might look like to try this on. I think
Yeah.
you've got to do
Right.
the try it on part.
Yeah. That makes total sense. So yeah, this uh, cognitive behavioral um, theory then works great inside organizations, because organizations, at least successful ones, they want to understand the next step.
Yes.
Where it seems like outside of an organization, to your point, we could take years to figure this out. No
Right.
problem. We got time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Very
Okay.
much so. Yep. Very much so.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So then, what is it that does create success for organizations? What are some of the things you've noticed over time that,
Yeah.
whether it's, so I'm thinking like personally, as a leader who's in an organization,
Yep.
but then broadly as the organization thinks about the way that they work with teams. Talk about
Yeah.
that for a second.
Yeah. So I think first, in terms of like as a leader, I'm always going to start with you have to be a leader who's willing to both look in the mirror and to get feedback. And so, like, what I
Mm,
mean by that
yeah.
is, you have to be willing to start with yourself. And especially, when you're in the midst of, let's say, an organizational culture challenge, your first job, is to stand in front of the mirror and try to understand what am I doing that's contributing to this? And be willing to like get curious about that, own it, and share it. So I think you start there instead of it's like look in the mirror instead of out the window. Like look at yourself instead
Mm,
of pointing to everyone else first. Got to start there. And then I think like the other thing in terms of leadership that's important is a willingness and a commitment to make the implicit explicit. I think we jump over that a lot. Like I think that whether it's because we're uncomfortable and we don't want to say the thing that is implicit, or we're just not like slowing down and taking that step, I think it's really important to pause and ask yourself, like, what's going unsaid here? What are my underlying expectations, assumptions, fears, worries, concerns? And can I name those for people? Like, so like the simple example is, can I name for people, hey, we are in like a challenging and unsettling time right now. We're not performing as well as we'd like to be on like X, Y, and Z measures. And
Hmm.
I don't know the path forward. Like I don't know all of what it's going to take to get us there. And so I need your help. Like I need all perspectives at the table, and I need us engaged in culture building, solving problems, not choosing to be passengers or spectators or what, like that you have to say those things. So I think like first and foremost, when I think about the leader's role, it's look in the mirror, more mirror, less window. And then
I
I
love
think
that.
it is make the implicit explicit, even and especially the scary stuff.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that. Um, I think it's clear that the best leaders are the ones who understand that, leading is not for them, but it's for the other friends, for others, right? And I think that from a performance perspective, the stuff that, when we get stuck in our head about how crummy a situation is, like we're human beings and it's totally normal, right?
Yes.
We can forget though that our role is to help, give them what they need and be there for our team.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
like, that's hard, right?
It's hard. It's hard. And I think the thing that you make me think of is another piece of this is investing in relationships, which again, like it sounds basic and boring and we often skip over it. Um, and I think leadership is about investing in relationships, letting other people know you and taking the time to know others, and being really clear in signaling this matters. Like our relationships matter because building those relationships is what allows us to take risks together, to learn together. Like you're trying to create that container for growth and trust and performance, and relationships is that, like that's the way, that's the path.
What are some of the best things you've ever seen that are good examples of that, like real life actually happening?
Yeah. So I'll give you one that comes to mind, and then I'll give you a couple others, but this is also going to sound really small, and yet I think it's profound. So I was doing work with a CEO and leadership and staff team, and the CEO had basically kind of like laid out to leadership and staff, here's the challenge that I need you to work on. Like I'm turning it over to you. I'm involved in these ways, but like,
Hmm.
boom, like I'm turning this kind of big, messy, and it was an adaptive challenge, like a big, messy, unclear problem.
Yeah.
And the staff and leadership team worked for quite some time on designing an approach, brought it back to him. And so and then we were all kind of in the room together as they're bringing this back to him. And they bring it back, and it's there. I mean, they've put, Paul, like they put everything into it. Like they've
Sure.
put their all into this thing.
Hmm.
And it's probably, I don't know, like their idea, their recommendation, let's say it's like 80% good or 80% perfect. You know what I mean? Like it's rock solid. Is it totally perfect? No, but it's rock solid. And so I can see this CEO as he's listening and he's asking questions. I feel like I can see into his mind, and I feel like I can see him thinking about tweaks that he could make, right? Like incremental
Of course.
improvements that he could make. And I know him, so I feel like I've got a sense of like where he is.
Hmm.
And he lets the team finish. And instead of, like, in that moment, he could have gracefully offered up, I wonder about X, or what if we also, or, like any one of those moves, he could have done that. And he
Hmm.
could have done it gracefully and with compassion and, all the right things. And instead, I mean, he looks at this team and he says, he like calls out a couple people, the piece where he can see their fingerprints on this, like names, Paul. When I hear this, I bet you influenced that, and like, just like, so he knows his people, he can see where their fingerprints are. And then he says, so I have one question for you. What do you need from me to support us in rolling this out? Tell me my role. And I mean, like,
Nice.
I thought it was, I mean, it's just brilliant, right? And I debriefed with him afterward, and he did have his list of like, like, these are the things that I would
Yeah.
have done differently. But he saw that moment for what it was, which was this opportunity to see people and value them and appreciate them, and to demonstrate that by saying, you just tell me my role, like, I'm here, I am all in. And that, like, it blows my mind, like, every time I think about it, it sounds so simple, but we do it so infrequently.
I love that. How was that possible for him to do that in that moment?
God. I mean, so here's one. I mean, I'm going to go back to, probably because it's my bias, he looks in the mirror all the time. Like, he's one
Mhm.
of those people who's developed this, I think, really healthy habit of, okay, like, if we're running into a problem, where am I in that? Like, what am I contributing to that? How do I need to
Yeah.
adjust and grow? So I would say built a muscle of self-awareness. You know what I mean? Like, built and nurtures a muscle of self-awareness. He asks for feedback pretty regularly because I think he's one of those people who gets it. Like, the science tells us we all think we are tremendously aware, and yet we are not. Like, we all believe that we're the
It's so true.
self-aware one, and we're not. And so I think he gets that. And then, like, final thing I would say is he is a relational leader. Like, he has invested the time in sharing himself with people and in getting to know other people. And so I think he can ground himself in those moments in, like, I'm sitting in a room with people who I trust, who I have tasked with doing a really hard thing, and here they are, like, sharing that hard work with me. And so, how do I want to choose to respond? Like, I think that's what he brings to that moment.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that because I think of those moments as like critical moments, I call them, right? Critical moments. And they're critical because the thing you do next
Yes.
has tremendous impact. Like the very next thing you do has tremendous impact, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I
And
think it's that. Oh, you go.
yeah, no. I just to finish that thought is that like critical moments often get hijacked by the ego,
Yes.
right? Because of our fear, because of
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so well said. Like, yeah. Yes. And so I think that you have to do this kind of, like, engage then in order to not get hijacked by the ego, because it's there for all of us. And to see those moments for what they are and to, like, seize them when they're in front of us. I think you have to have, like, this really consistent practice of building that muscle of self-awareness, of nurturing relationships, and being able to respond instead of react. Like, being really skilled at, okay, like, my aim today is, as often as I possibly can, I want to respond instead of react.
I love that. How does the concept of practice come up as we talk about this? Like, what is the role of practice in
Yeah.
the context of a leader?
I think it's huge. I mean, here's how I think about it is, So like, I guess one, I think about the idea that, when every day, like day to day in your leadership, you don't really have like a practice field, right? Like it feel like you're always in the game. You're not like, you don't get to step out and say, well, this, like over here, I'm on the practice field right now. Like, oh, now I'm in the game. Like day to day, you're in the game. And yet I think like you need to practice, right?
Hmm.
And so like the way
Right.
I think about that is two things. Like one, I think you need to be able to name for people, I'm trying this on. I'm practicing at this. So I think, because I think that creates a little bit of that practice field space in your day, right? Like I think if you can say to your team, you know what? I am trying to get way better at asking questions instead of telling. And so, like you're going to see me trying that on. You're going to see me flounder. You're going to see me fail. And my ask of you, if you can do it, is flag it for me. Like I'm trying to get better at it, flag it for me. So I think like you can
Hmm.
create more of that practice space for yourself, but you have to be intentional about it. And then the other thing that I think about, that I work on with clients is, you know, let me in as your coach. Like let me join you in whatever it is, like not all the time, but like in the big meeting that you're facilitating. Let me
Mm.
join you when you're working with your team on this thing, and tell your team why I'm there. And then because that gives us then shared experience to debrief, to talk about, to draw learnings from, instead of just relying on you reporting back, here was the experience. And so I think that also creates like a little bit of that like practice field type space.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. So name it, that which I absolutely love, and then consider who you might let in, whether it's your coach or whether
Yes.
it's, yeah,
Yeah, like that's
a
exactly
swim
that.
buddy, a peer, whatever that, yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
which is fantastic. Um,
But yeah, I mean, Paul, like I would, I think like your comment around, it doesn't have to be, as a leader, it doesn't have to be a coach who you invite in, right? To that space to like be the person who helps you then draw some learning from what you're doing. You can say it to a peer, or you can say it to a mentor, right? Like there are lots of
yeah,
ways to construct that kind of learning partnership. But I think that's what you're aiming for, is like, I want a partner in here with me who can see what I can't see, or who can give me visibility to more of what's happening that I might not be able to see.
yeah, yeah, I love that. And I'm thinking about a a leader. This was a leader of a large organization, and we had taken his team through the advice monster idea inside of a coaching discussion. In other words, how to be a leader and a coach, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And he was like, "Oh man, that's me,"
Yeah,
which it's kind of all of us, but anyway, some more than others. But he was like, "Man, oh gosh, that is me." And like I'm not kidding, for the next 2 years, he had people around him, like strategically and intentionally, where like they had permission to press the advice monster button, the advice monster alarm,
I love that.
when he just wanted to jump in and fix.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Like I love the visual of like press the advice monster button. You know what I mean? Like I just think like that, like you can hold that in your mind, right? Like he could
Yep.
say that to people and like they could hold that in their mind. I'd love that.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
I want to throw a question out, shifting gears just a little bit, but I love this question for anybody in this space, and it's a broad question, and you probably heard this before, but what advice would you have for your younger self about playing better, struggling less, and enjoying more?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so like one, maybe this is my top, and I'm gonna name it as advice for like my former self, but like it's something I work on to this day,
Yeah.
which is do it afraid. Like do it afraid, meaning I think we get so much, like there's so much out there about kind of mastering the fear of failure, like getting over the fear of failure, work, all of that, like controlling it, mastering it, whatever it is. And like I'm glad for the people who can master it, get over it, like whatever they can do. I can't. Like I am always going to have that voice in my mind that is afraid. That is afraid of, how am I going to look? How is this going to sound? All, like whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like at this stage, I'm way more comfortable just like acknowledging that and saying, that's fine. Like, I'm just going to do it afraid. Like, the fear is not going anywhere. And so that's okay. I'm just going to choose to do it afraid. Whereas, like, I think my younger self, that keeps you on the sidelines, right? Like, that keeps you waiting for the moment when you have somehow magically like mastered the fear. So I would say do it afraid.
Oh, that's great. Would your younger self have gone to the Wind River Mountains and camped at 13,000 feet for a week?
God, no. God, no. No, no way. No way. Because I would have been like, I would have this, like, I would have been waiting to feel like I can do that. And like that feeling isn't coming, I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, God,
Right.
no.
And I would say we all had fears about that experience too, by the way. I know I did, you know,
Yes.
and
Yeah. Would
right.
you, like, would your younger self have done that? Would you have done that?
Yes, actually, my younger self
You
would have
did.
been was too dumb. And and I'm not giving myself a lot of points today for being smart either, by the way. I'm just a little bit smarter.
Oh God. I
But
love
I
that.
was yeah, when I was younger, the answer was yes to
Yeah.
everything. And that,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
See,
know,
that makes me jealous. Like I feel, how like you look at what someone else has and you're like, I want that mindset. Like I want that mindset. Yeah.
but then I'm like, I'm just lucky I survived those years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I get that.
it's like
Trade-offs, right? Yeah.
the male brain not fully formed until 25
Yeah.
or 55 or whatever,
Right.
for some of us.
Whenever.
Yeah, whatever. But yeah, that's yeah, I would say that experience was definitely outside my comfort zone um as I prepared for it. Um not knowing how I would move through some of the things that I knew I would have to, because I just hadn't, right, I hadn't done it in a long time. I was, these um you know we live such comfortable lives. I'm
Yes.
like, wait a minute, I'm going to sleep on rocks for a week. Uh, I got bamboo sheets. Do they have those out there? I don't know.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
You
Yes.
know,
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think that like the thing that allowed me to like go on that trip is that I lived in denial a little bit. Like, you know what I mean? That like
mm,
leading up to it, I think I was a little bit in like willful denial, like just not allowing myself to think about, I'm really gonna have to sleep on the ground, like in the cold, sleep on the ground in the cold. No, thank you.
yeah. Well, and you were smart. You brought a swim buddy,
Yes, yes, yep, very
which
true.
was, which was very smart. And
Yeah,
but I think it's funny because you what you find out. One of the big takeaways from our conversation today is this idea of naming the things that we're either struggling with or we're going through, and I think that is such a great concept.
yeah,
And so and then when you're in community with others and they are naming the things
yeah,
that you are struggling with,
yeah,
it's and it helps. I think it helps, when groups do hard things together,
I agree.
it really creates this incredible dynamic.
Yeah, I agree. I think it builds momentum around, and you said it earlier, like this idea of what might be possible. Like I think that like
Mm-hmm.
the more we can do that and we see other people do that, it does shift you much more to a mindset of, oh, like I can start to explore what might be possible now because I'm not so captured by or like beholden to my worries, my fears, like whatever that negative story in your mind, I'm no longer so captured by that because other people are naming things too.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Kathleen, as we start to kind of wrap this thing up, and first of all, appreciate this time. It's really great to see you. Great to be with you, and spend this time talking about performance and inside organizations. I love it. Could talk all day about it.
Same.
What do you want to say about the work that you do with your clients? I am a little bit curious about that since you've stepped out in the last couple of years in a new way, and
yeah.
curious.
Talk about fear, right? Like stepping out, and doing something new. Definitely was afraid. Yeah, I mean, I would say that like now I get to spend all of my time, like working with boards, CEOs, leadership teams on organizational culture and organizational design, which for me is really just like, at the end of the day, what that is about is how do I help people, advise them, support them around creating conditions where we can all thrive, like where you can be in high trust, high performing relationships on teams like that. So that's the work that I do. I get to do it all across the country now. And yeah, it's what I love. It is what I absolutely
That's
love to do.
great.
Yeah.
And God, like you could work for 1 billion years doing this, and your work would be only half done. Do you know what I mean? There's so much opportunity to make an impact, and I know you see that all the time. So
it is. It's the most, I think, like gratifying, satisfying work to get to do.
Yeah, it is crazy how difficult it is to create these experiences for people and organizations, like thriving, positive, cultures that can sustain over a long period of time. It's just so hard to do. So many people do it badly. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us.
And it's slow, right? I think like that's the other, at least in my experience, like there aren't like, there's no like quick path, it is slow and steady and messy. And so, yeah, I think it takes time. And that's why I value like getting to be in it with people is to be that person who can try to predict a little bit, and say, yeah, like this is going to be messy. And to be the person who can like hold up the mirror on the incremental wins, and say like, but look, like here's where you are making progress. And yes, it is still messy and slow.
It just comes up for me. That's so true. I'm thinking about like, I have a book on my bookshelf over here. And it was written by a guy named Larry Wingert. It's maybe 15 years old. And the name of the book is You're Broke Because You Want to Be Broke. And he was this guy who was around, and I'm pretty sure he's still around, but he was around years ago and selling his book. And he was a very in your face approach. Like he was like, listen to me, just do this and you'll fix it. But most people won't do it.
Yeah.
Will you be part of the 2% that will, anyway, I'm thinking about that as my own approach, because my own approach is probably similar to yours. And some days I just want to be like, y'all are broke here because you want to be broke. Just do something different, and I'm not sure that would work, but what do you think?
I don't think so, but go try it. Let me know.
This is a dysfunctional organization because you want it to be so.
Right. Yeah.
That would be my next book.
There's something there. Yeah.
Something there. That's great. Awesome. So where can we find you? Where can we reach out to you? Where can our listeners reach out to you if you want to?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me. I have a website, kbdconsulting.com. So you can find me there. So those would be the two places. Fantastic.
Well, this has been awesome to catch up. I love the concepts. I'm a big note taker, so I just can't help myself. I said to Kevin today behind the scenes, I'm like, Kevin, I'm not going to take so many notes because then I have to look down. It doesn't look like I'm looking at Kathleen, and there I am taking all these notes. Guilty, but I can't help myself.
Yeah.
I
I love the
love,
conversation. Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you. I love Dress for the Weather. And I love, yeah, Do It Afraid,
Do it
and
right.
among
Yeah.
many other quotable quotes. So
Mhm.
awesome stuff. Kathleen, thank you so much for being with us, and really appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for making the time for it. I loved catching up with you. I love talking camping trip, and I love your book. Yep. I just
Thank you.
thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation with you.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Well, that's a wrap. Episode number 3 with Kathleen Boyle Dalen. And this is a consummate pro, folks. Kathleen is amazing. Love her experiences. I love her psychology background, and her clients are super lucky. I'm telling you, lots of quotes, lots of note taking from this episode for sure. I love that Kathleen went to this idea of curiosity as the antidote to defensiveness. Man, defensiveness is extremely difficult as it shows up in interactions, and it can show up in a lot of different places. I love that she talks about naming the thing, whether it's struggle or fear or what have you, as a key to performing better. And she talked about doing it afraid. Just do it, even though you're afraid. Step into it. Otherwise, there's a whole lot of things we're not going to do. So anyway, this was really a great session. So great to have Kathleen on the podcast. So thanks again for tuning into the podcast today. This is the Most Important Game podcast. Once again, I'm Paul Monahan. My mission is to help you lead, play, and perform at your best by helping you to focus on your inside game, not just your outside game. And if you'd like to learn more about me or the work that I do, you can visit my website. It's paul@paulmonahan.com. And you can find my book there, The Most Important Game, which is the real reason for this podcast to begin with. And it's available in hardcover, paperback, ebook, and Audible, wherever fine books are sold. If you're watching on YouTube and you enjoyed the conversation, please consider subscribing. Go ahead and hit the like button as well. It goes a long way to helping me to bring you the kinds of episodes that we want to over time. If you're listening to the podcast, please hit that follow button so you don't miss an episode. We really have an incredible list of guests that we've lined up for the near term and long term as well. And we want to make sure that you don't miss an episode. And if you have any topics you'd like for my guests and I to cover over time, please just drop us a note. Yeah, I'm at paul@paulmonahan.com. Let us know what you're thinking. Special shout out to our producer, Kevin Monahan. Thanks, Kev. Great work today. Until next time, remember, don't give up. Stay in the game. It is possible for you to play better, struggle less, and enjoy more.